Bradley doesn't know I'm doing this, but I pre-ordered 2 Blu-rays of 13 tracks to Frighten Agatha Black, and I'm going to do a giveaway. How do you enter? Really simple. Watch this episode, DM me on either Instagram or Twitter what film was a huge influence for 13 tracks. I'll run this for, I don't know, like a week. By the time this airs, my copies will be being sent to me. So as soon as I get them, I'll be able to get them sent out. But that's the question. If you want to win a free copy of this very, very unique film that has definitely a labor of love, all you have to do is watch this episode and DM me. Do not comment. I will delete all comments. DM me what film was a major influence on 13 tracks. Good luck. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and I'm back with another filmmaker interview with the lovely Bradley Harding, who I connected with through a mutual, Preston, who's been on my channel before. We did his influential horror back at the beginning of the year. He introduced me via Twitter to Bradley, and so we're essentially here to talk about his film 13 Tracks to Scare Agatha Black. Did I say that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's a mouthful. You got it.
It is great. Yeah. So just let's talk a little bit about you. What do you do? What do you like? Just anything you want to share.
Sure. Well, I am finally calling myself a filmmaker because I did actually finish a feature movie. So
yeah,
I live in Dallas and I make independent movies on the side. I'm a writer. And I've been an entertainment writer, a marketing, advertising, copywriter for about 15 years. And I've also been the panel coordinator for Texas Frightmare Weekend, which is a big horror convention in Dallas for the last 17 years. It's been around for a while, and I was I've been affiliated with them I guess since their second year. So those are my horror bona fides. I've written for Fangoria and Blumhouse, and so I've been able to maintain some kind of a horror connection before I started this journey into feature filmmaking. That I have always loved horror films, and they've always been a part of my life. I mean, since I was very little. So so that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So Bradley was kind enough to send me a screener for the film that we're going to be talking about. So I was able to see it. It is not out yet. What is the release date for this?
December 13th, Blu-ray and video on demand.
Okay.
So it was a long time coming.
Yeah.
we had a few pandemic setbacks with editing and just finishing the movie, but finally this journey has taken about 3 years or so. So yeah, finally we have a release date, and it's in time for the Christmas holiday, so you can buy a Blu-ray, for your loved one.
Yeah.
For that horror fan in your life.
Yeah.
So, but no, it's great to finally have a release date and be able to say, not only did we finish the movie, but you can actually see it. I don't know the platforms. I don't know. It's video on demand, but I have not been given a list of the various platforms that you'll be able to access it on. But I'm assuming it will be like, Prime or maybe Tubi. I don't know yet. But video on demand. I guess that's I don't even know. I can't name a platform that you could go to I guess rent. Maybe Apple TV. I don't rent movies on demand. I stream them. But,
I do
so
some.
I don't know.
I think primarily it would be Amazon. That would be like normally when I see things that come up and they say they're going to be streamed on, or I mean, they're going to be on demand. It's usually through that, or it'll be through like some of those more like specialized subscriptions, like Showtime, or some of those kind of things too. But you have to have like the special subscription to watch them or whatever. So Prime is probably the main one, I would think.
Right. Okay. I rarely rent anything,
Yeah,
if we have so many streaming apps,
so true.
that we pay for, so I'm not gonna, rent anything. Anyway,
I
so the long answer
totally
is
understand.
I don't know, but you
Yeah,
can buy the Blu-ray. So if you're into physical media, you'll be able to buy the Blu-ray for sure.
yeah. Yeah, and I think, some things are, questionable whether you'd want to rent it if you've never seen it, you don't know if you're gonna like it. What I will say, and not just because Bradley's in front of me, but this is worth renting. If you like horror from especially
Oh,
indie
thank you.
indie horror, anything that's like outside of the box or unique, and you really like, unique horror, I think this is more than worth the whatever it's going to cost to rent it. So I do definitely think that that's the case for this one.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a slow burn, and I knew when I was writing it, it would probably not be for everybody.
Sure.
It's an homage in a way to some of the early film or early thrillers from the 70s, drive-in movies that were more psychological, more of a slow
Yes.
burn. Um,
Mhm.
so, just so you know, it's not uh,
Yeah.
a gore fest. There's not there's no CGI in it, so it's all old
Right.
school. So it's very much a throwback to something that you'd see at the
Yeah.
drive-in in 1973, and intentional too.
Yeah.
So
And I think too, one of the things that I thought of was like before there was sound. Like, because even though there's dialogue, it doesn't really rely on the dialogue to tell the story. It's the music and the stories that are being told over everything else that kind of
right,
it just kind of made
right.
me think of those films like where the silent films relied on like music to tell you how you're supposed to feel and what you're supposed to think as the movie is like moving forward. And that's kind of this kind of made me feel like that too, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
there were a couple of films that did help inspire the movie, and they
Oh,
were
okay.
movies where there's a protagonist and we're inside their head. So you
Mm.
hear you hear their thoughts, you hear what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Let's Scare Jessica to Death and
Yep.
Messiah of Evil both
Okay.
have these voiceovers,
Yeah.
that are
I can see that.
sometimes all encompassing, where the
Yep.
female protagonist is sort of inside her own head. She's talking
Mhm.
to herself. Sometimes
Yep.
she's talking to other people,
Yep.
other spirits or entities or whatever. So that
Mhm.
both of those movies actually had a hand in forming 13 tracks. But instead
Okay.
of the protagonist, hearing the protagonist's thoughts,
Mhm.
she's listening to spoken word albums, scary story albums that sometimes inform her and sometimes warn her about things that may or may not happen. Um,
Mhm.
but I'd like to think they also kind of mirror her thoughts as well. Uh,
Yeah, I can
so,
see that.
but that's where that uh, a lot of the voiceover came into play. That uh, the whole spoken word album
Mhm.
sort of guiding
Yeah.
the character, the main character.
Yeah. So I have like I want to definitely talk about like inspirations in general for this because the concept is really unique. Like I think it's got a lot of like familiarity as far as if you've been a horror fan, if you've seen a lot of things from all not just like newer horror but older horror as well like we've already mentioned. Like you definitely go into this feeling like I get this. Like you you go in you're like I understand and then but it's still also very very different from anything at least that I have seen. So I want to kind of pick your head about like what like inspirations like where this came from and where you got the ideas and stuff.
Right. Well, thank you for those kind words.
Yeah.
It's funny because I've been working on this film for so long, um,
Mhm.
and we previewed it. We did debut the film in
Oh,
May at
oh,
Texas Frightmare Weekend.
okay.
But there hasn't been a lot of dialogue with other people who were not associated with the movie.
I understand.
I haven't, I've only sent out a few screeners. I've not really read any reviews. So it's interesting to hear what people who were not associated
Mm,
with the film, or, who are my friends,
I
think
know
of
what
it.
you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just somebody coming in from the outside who's not worked on it or hasn't heard me talking
yeah,
about it incessantly,
yeah,
someone just going,
yeah,
oh, okay, well, here's what I think of it, and this
yeah,
is interesting. So that's nice to get a little validation. I'm glad that you
yeah.
understood it and it wasn't this weird puzzle box, because it's
No,
not supposed to be. Um,
no.
but the inspiration for it came over a decade ago, when people had music blogs, and they were, before there was that weird, sort of, tampering down on music copyright. People
Yes.
were uploading record albums. They were
Yeah,
lots of people were uploading record albums, and
yeah.
you could download them. And
Mhm.
I became obsessed with this blog that this guy had started, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was like something like Spooky Scary Records or something, and it was essentially
Yeah.
just him collecting these old spoken word records, by Vincent Price and Boris Karloff,
Oh, yeah.
celebrating these records and some of them were touchstones for me. I mean, as a kid, I listened to all kinds of records,
Yeah.
story records, and I had some horror records as well. I wasn't obsessed with them. I didn't collect horror specifically, but I had a few that he had posted, and so that was sort of my gateway. And it was like, well, what else have you got? What else is there?
Yeah.
And so there, Boris Karloff and Vincent Price, and lesser, voices. Lots of companies put out scary story records. Just people. You know,
Huh.
Before there was cable and 100
Right.
channels for kids to watch. A record album was a viable piece of entertainment for a kid.
Yeah.
You go to a drugstore sometimes with mom, you'd buy a record album for $3.99. It sounded fun.
Yeah.
What's this about?
Right. Yeah.
So this blog with all of these
Mhm.
records that I eventually downloaded all of them. Um,
Yeah.
I became obsessed with them and
Mhm.
started collecting the actual vinyl that they were
Okay.
associated with.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I've always been a big vinyl collector,
Okay.
and I've always loved sound effects records, which is what was part of that blog, his
Yeah.
blog as well.
Yeah.
I think most people are familiar with scary sound effects records, for
Yes.
Halloween.
Yes.
But there was
Yeah.
also a whole subgenre of spoken word records that were a
I
lot
had no
like,
idea.
the old radio serials. And
Yeah.
that's probably going a little further back even for you, but radio serials from the 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
that like Suspense, and
Yeah.
where, uh, other shows like that. So
Yeah.
these children's records of the 60s and 70s, after those radio shows had kind of worn out their welcome, they kind
Yeah.
of replaced that, in a way. So in the
Alright. Yeah.
60s and 70s, they were kind of I don't know that they were a big deal, but they made a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so I, downloaded, a couple dozen of these digital files,
Yeah.
and I was listening to them on my way to work. Just some of them really lovely children's stories. Some of them were adult. Some of
Yeah.
them with full sound effects. Some of them with
Mhm.
just stark musical cues.
Yeah.
But all of them very effective. Some cheaper than
Yeah.
others. But anyway, I just started thinking about, well, what if there was a film that revolved around a protagonist who became obsessed with listening to these records, and what if they started giving them messages? They're talking to them in a way, or
Yeah.
revealing occult secrets or something like that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how that started. And
Mm.
I one of my favorite horror films is Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and
That's a
so
good one.
I immediately sort of started juggling themes, and
Yeah.
what if these horror records, were actually in the mind of this person, say a young woman who
Mhm.
becomes obsessed with them for some reason, and what would happen? What would they say to her and why? And how would that help drive the narrative?
Yeah.
So, and I was also very mindful of making the stories separate, but also the connective tissue. I'm not I'm not a fan of anthology movies. I don't
Oh,
like little bits of things. There are some
okay.
anthologies that I can sit through, but I'm not a huge fan of them. I just don't,
Okay.
there's always one or two that are great in the
Sure. And then you
anthology, and
have
then
the, like,
the
man
other
ones.
3 or 4.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but thinking about it now, I could probably name 5 or 6 that are pretty terrific,
Sure.
but I'm not in general a fan of the anthology format. I would just prefer
Okay.
one movie, one 90-minute movie. So I was very
Okay.
mindful of that. And
Okay.
the original the original title was called Scary Stories to Frighten Agatha Black, and that didn't get me very far because it stopped the conversation because everyone thought that it was an anthology,
Yep.
and it sounded very much like Scary Stories to Tell in the
To
Dark.
tell in the dark. Yeah.
Right. So I changed that quickly.
Yeah.
Wanted to make sure that there was some connection to
Right.
vinyl because the vinyl component's very important.
And very important.
Um, so anyway, that's how that got started. But yeah, that backtracking,
Yeah.
the blog, and the uploaded files to those records. That's what
Yeah.
originally got me started on the road to writing the script, which is another
Yeah.
very interesting story. But that was the
I think it's
impetus
interesting.
for 13 tracks.
Yeah. I didn't know that that was really a thing. I mean, I know I'm like a big fan of Vincent Price for sure, but I don't think I realized or knew just that there were a lot of things like that because I mean, I grew up on like cassettes, you know? And so like we
Right,
would have the
right,
the Halloween cassettes with the werewolf noises and the rustling
right.
of the bushes that we play outside for Halloween for trick-or-treaters and stuff like that. So that was kind of it's interesting because I was going to comment on this like I think the transfer of media styles is really smart because you've got the vinyl, but then you've also got her where she makes them digital so she can listen to them when she can't carry it around. So she's got like like her headphones in and I
Right,
and I
right,
think that it's interesting because all of these things tie into all the different types of media that anybody watching this I feel like at some point can relate to. So even though, I didn't grow up listening to vinyl, it did very much remind me of what it was like to use cassette tapes to record things that I wanted to hear or to have those cassettes that did play the
right.
Halloween stories and the Halloween noises and all of these things. And then to add it to the digital era, as it were, and then make it so that it's like you can still have these things that are these classic roots in these stories or this music or whatever it is and then still appreciate it even now. I thought that was like really, really clever. I loved that because it just felt more like familiar, I guess, because I feel like I said, anybody watching this will have some notion of what any stage of that would feel like because everyone's been through some of it, right? So I thought that was really, really smart.
Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, uh, when tapes came out, that
Hmm.
was, once removed from all the vinyl stuff, and I don't think there were maybe as many scary story tapes. I
No.
don't know. I wasn't
Yeah.
following that at the time, but I know that there were
Probably
lots of
not.
you know, uh, audio tapes. I mean, I collected tapes as well.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I and all of the scary sound effects tapes too.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear that, you were able to, like, make some kind of connection even though,
Yeah.
vinyl may not be in your wheelhouse. But I think, in general, the horror
Hmm.
crowd, they're
Yes.
familiar with a lot of this stuff. They're familiar with touchstones even though they may not have grown up with vinyl
Yeah. No,
records
I
or
agree.
grown up going to the drive-in,
Sure.
they're familiar enough with the
Yes.
world and, just with the history of their favorite movies
I agree.
to know that there were other eras and other kinds of technology. There was film before there was digital. So
Right.
Hopefully that will carry over and it won't be this strange thing to
I don't
even,
think, yeah. Yeah.
Gen Z or a younger
Whatever.
crowd. Hopefully
Right.
younger people will be able to appreciate at
I
least, some of that.
I definitely think so,
So,
yeah, and it does makes me think of, like, when I used to watch, like, like, Vincent Price reading The Telltale Heart, and it was this, like, black and white on stage performance of him, just him, moving around room to room
right.
in this, like, small stage, reading, Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, and I think, like, people who have experienced things like that definitely, I mean, because I mean, I'm part of the digital, like, that's what I'm used to. I'm familiar with, like, so, I went from cassettes to CDs to, like, iPods and whatever, right? So, but I think that I still
Right.
have memories like that tied into this concept of using the vinyl in the scary stories. Like, I think it all goes. I think anybody watching it, no matter the age, will be able to connect to it for sure.
Cool, cool. Well, I hope so, and
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to having that conversation with people who don't understand what's going on. But
sure.
it's nice to know that you think that. So
Yeah,
I'm too close to it to know what the audience will think or what
I
they'll
know what
take
you mean.
away. At this point, it's like I wrote it, I edited it. It's
Yeah.
it's just very close to me. So
No,
hopefully
for
other
sure.
people will get it.
Um, yeah, and like, so you mentioned that you had some, like, I think some pandemic things that came up. So, like, what was, like, the journey to get to this, to, like, get this final product of this film? Like,
Right. I've even forgotten parts of the journey because it's taken so long.
yeah.
But I will tell you that when I first started writing it,
Mhm.
I started writing the script. I already had the
Mhm.
treatment,
Mhm.
but I met this very talented writer who was also a musician, Andrew
Mhm.
Jones.
Okay.
And when I met him, he was also he was into vinyl records and
Okay.
into a lot of the same weird stuff that I was. So
Yeah.
when I met him and I heard some of his work, some of his music that he'd written, and he's just a very talented uh, singer songwriter as well. But when
Oh,
I
wow.
met him, I knew that I would be able to write a script and to actually make this movie because I knew that going into it
Oh,
I would have to have a relationship with a musician because the film is so dependent on music and sound and all of the
okay, yeah.
voiceover stuff. You know,
Yeah.
I would not have been able to do that myself, even though I
Right.
wrote all the
Understand.
stories. The music is too important, and it's more than
Yeah.
just needle drop stuff. No pun intended. It's
Yeah.
new music that would have to have been created. So
Yeah.
after I made that connection with Andy, I wrote the script. And then okay, I'll try to give you the cliff notes because it's long. It's a long story, but it's interesting. It's
That's
it's
great.
part of the story of this movie. But
Mhm.
I'm going to get some of this wrong. But I finished the script, and
Mhm.
then I live in Dallas, and around the time that I'd finished the script, a new production company had just started here
Okay.
called Cinestate.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Cinestate, but it was sort of a big deal locally.
Okay.
And Cinestate, I read about them, and I'm not sure exactly how everything fell into place, but
Okay.
Cinestate had an appearance at Texas Frightmare Weekend, and I knew about them. And so Andy and I made a connection with the gentleman who created Cinestate.
Oh,
And then
okay.
we started a relationship with one of the producers and sent her the script.
Okay.
And after they had the script, Cinestate bought Fangoria.
Oh.
And right. And at that point, our mutual friend, Preston Fossil,
Mhm.
found himself working at Cinestate and then Fangoria. And so he
Mhm.
became the gatekeeper for the scripts. And so there's this whole story with Fangoria um, in Dallas, which was crazy great at the time,
Yeah.
having showing interest in my film, which
Mm.
my movie is would never have been created had I not been a Fangoria kid. I was not a monster kid. but I grew up when
Yeah.
Fangoria just came out in
Mhm.
1979, and I'm a Fangoria kid. So if
Mhm.
a movie were to have come out in 1979, it would have looked, and I had been involved in it, it would have looked a lot like 13 tracks.
Yeah.
So I felt like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is the
Yeah.
perfect time. This is the perfect movie for a Fangoria movie because they were going to put films out under the Fangoria label.
Yeah.
Um, Things happened and choices were made. And
Mhm.
fortunately, they did not want to make my movie. So
Oh, okay.
I'd written the script so that I could make it anyway. So part of that was a relief because I knew that if
Oh.
they had purchased the script, they wouldn't have wanted me to direct it. They would have taken it and done
Oh.
something else to it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But if they had wanted to use my script and pay me, fine. I'll take whatever it is and I'll go make my other movie, But
Yeah.
what a great thing to have that on your resume. I wrote
Yeah.
this movie that Fangoria produced. But I don't know
Yeah.
if you've
I know
been
what you mean.
following any of this, but the movies that came out under that banner, I was not much of a fan of. So I
Oh.
feel like um, the few movies that were produced under that banner in that specific under that specific company, um,
Yeah.
I'm glad that things played out the way that they did because
Yeah.
I was able to scrounge up the money to make this movie. It was co-produced by a wonderful friend of mine, um, uh, and we were
Yeah.
able to you know make the film for $20,000. So,
Oh,
which is
wow.
a micro budget, and
Yeah.
I'm really proud of what we were able to actually do. But
Yeah.
so I'm sorry, I'm now on my caffeine high, and I'm going to take another sip. Um, so Cinestate slash
Mhm.
Fangoria decided they didn't want to do anything with it.
Yeah.
So I decided I was going to just make it on my own.
Yeah.
So the co-producer, Lloyd Cryer, is
Mhm.
also the genius behind Texas Frightmare Weekend. So
Oh, okay.
he read the script and
Mhm.
he connected with it, really liked it, and through Lloyd we were able to get Udo Kier, one of my favorite horror, one of my favorite genre actors, put it that
Okay.
way, to
Yeah.
record the voiceover for the beginning of
Ugh.
the film, which
Okay.
was terrific because he
So
was
good.
the voice that I heard in my head as I was writing
Ooh,
that
yeah.
opening voiceover.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so that was a nice little
That's
um,
awesome.
thing. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, we shoot the movie, and it was truly um, the most positive creative experience I've ever had because our cast was amazing, and the people that I was able to gather for a crew, everyone was excited about it, and that's unique. I'm finding out more and more for a micro budget film, but we were
Oh,
very prepared. Um, a lot of things fell into place. I found an
yeah.
amazing lead actress who was completely dedicated. Everyone
Yeah.
in the cast completely dedicated. So it was just it was a love in is what it was. I um, so I'm looking forward to making my next one.
Mhm.
Hopefully, it will go a little faster than this one did, but
Yeah.
the the actual production was very smooth. It's just
That's good.
after we'd finished shooting,
Mhm.
um, there were some bumps along the way with an editor who fell out, and then I had to
Oh,
find another editor,
yeah.
and then that editor, this is all during the pandemic, and so
Yeah.
that editor, you know, had to go where the work was, and he couldn't really work on my film for the nothing that I would have been able to pay. So,
Yeah.
fortunately, this wonderful friend slash editor, this amazing filmmaker, and I'll name
Mhm.
him because it's part of the story. His name is Tony Brownrigg, and he's a great filmmaker in his own right. But his
Mhm.
father was also a director in Dallas, and his father made a lot of drive-in movie classics like Don't
Oh.
Look in the Basement and Don't Open the
Oh.
Door, Scum of
Yeah.
the Earth,
Yeah.
yeah, SF Brownrigg. So his son was essential in getting the film finished because although he didn't have time to edit it, he built me a computer with editing software on it so that I could edit it myself.
Oh, wow.
And I
Okay.
did.
Wow.
So, which is amazing and generous, and you know, one of the great stories. I mean, there are just so many positive stories involved with the making of this movie. You know, and the negative stuff has easily fallen away. I mean, the negative stuff
That's
was
good.
just inactivity. You know, waiting
Yeah.
for the film to be edited or
Mm.
waiting to find a distributor. You know, that stuff is
Yeah.
deadly. But so I was able to edit it myself, and fortunately, you know, I mean, some of the footage was difficult to work with. You know, we didn't have a lot of time, so we
Oh,
couldn't get a lot of coverage. You know, I
yeah.
mean, we were shooting on a very
Okay.
tight schedule, so we were able to do a few reshoots, which is normal, you know, for a film.
Right.
But with a lot of the editing, I truly think that I would have been the only person to be able to make some of those decisions because I also wrote it, you
Right.
know, and
That makes sense. Yeah.
there was a lot of creative editing in
Yeah.
this, you know, a lot of shots that we didn't get or things we had
Yeah.
to fudge, you know, and I
Yeah.
don't know how successful I was with some of those decisions, but it's like, you know, on a low budget, you know, you work with what you have. So,
Sure.
um, but yeah, after months of editing, sort of
Yeah.
learning the software and editing the film myself. I
Mhm.
finished it with my partner, Andy, who
Mhm.
did all
Mhm.
the music and sound. He also recorded the sound. And
Yeah.
we put the film together and found a distributor. And
Yeah.
so this is over 3 years, over a 3 year
Yeah.
period. So
Yeah.
so now it's finally ready for people to see. And
Yeah.
actually talking it through, it's not all that interesting. I thought that there are interesting things in the story, but yeah, it's not all that interesting. It's actually kind of boring, actually.
I
But
think
uh,
I think one of my favorite things about talking to indie filmmakers is those things though, because one of the things that I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of the filmmaking industry, whether it's big production or not. But I think it's not that, bigger productions can't be passion projects, not that they don't have obstacles, but I think what you face, especially when you're coming completely out of pocket, when you're doing this like all on your own, you're having to wear all of those different hats and take ownership over all of these different pieces, especially when things fall through and then COVID hits and there's all these things. To me, it always impresses me to hear like what indie filmmakers are able to come up with given what they have to. I mean, $20,000, that's like such a small budget to be able,
yeah,
and I think
yeah,
like, and obviously like I didn't know that going into watching it, but like having already seen it and then hearing that, I'm like even more like that's crazy impressive because when you think about like I've seen a lot of indie things. I've seen some that have been the bigger, like what I call like bigger indie productions where people get really lucky and Shutter picks up their movie or it goes to a festival and like all these things happen, and the sound quality, the production value, all these things are very obviously like higher budget. But for to hear your budget and the things that you kind of had to deal with editing wise and that kind of stuff, it's like all of those things that were really important were not compromised. Like you were able to still take those things like the storytelling, voiceovers, the music, and just the general atmosphere that moves along with the plot, and with all of those things that have happened with that lower budget, we're able to pull off something really special. And I think that is what makes it not boring, because when we hear about filmmakers, that have these $1 million projects and they have all these people at their disposal, and it's just such a different thing to hear what indie filmmakers are able to do with the things that they have to deal with in the interim. Like it's impressive to me.
right, right. Well, and it keeps you on your toes, and you know,
Yeah. Yeah, I
you
bet
gotta
it does.
you got to be creative, you know? You've got to
Yes.
be able to make creative decisions, and it
Yes.
did help that I wrote the script and I directed it, you know, and as I'm
Right.
editing it, I could make the right decision as far as
Yeah.
losing something, you know,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of storytelling involved in this film. There are a lot of layers.
Yes.
It sometimes if something, you know, if something gets lost, you know, if a piece of dialogue is lost, you know, seemingly innocuous piece of dialogue, you know,
Yeah.
I would know immediately whether it's, you know, important or not. You know, can
Right.
we
No,
lose
that makes
this?
sense.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple of scenes, you know, that were, you know, didn't work out so well. You know, we had to kind of
Yeah.
rethink them, you know, and we lost one of them. But it made it a lot smoother in that
Yeah.
I was able to make those decisions, and a different editor would not have been able to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
That
working on a low budget film like this, it requires a lot of, you know, creativity. You know, I
yeah,
had to
thinking
rewrite a
outside the box.
scene days before we shot it because we lost some of the actors. It's like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
we're moving ahead. We can't
Yeah.
postpone shooting the scene. We have to shoot the scene because we have a location that's really cool that we need to use. So
Yeah,
those
yeah.
characters don't exist anymore. Now we're going to create a new character. And I could do that because I created the
Yeah.
script, and I could do
Yeah.
it organically where it
Yeah.
didn't mess up, you know, a lot of the narrative. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, and I know you've like you kind of talked a little bit about like the what your experiences were. Like, what do you think is like what's your favorite thing about filmmaking? If you had to pick, I'm sure there's several
oh
things, but if you
wow.
had to pick like one of your favorite
Right.
things.
Yeah, well, before I made this film, I would have said editing because I've always loved editing my films. With this one, I made the decision. I was like, I'm not going to shoot it. I'm not going to edit it.
Mhm.
I'm going to write it and I'm going to direct it so I can
Yeah.
focus on, you know, the performances. I can give the actors more of my time, and we can make
Yep.
sure that what is captured on screen, even though we don't have a lot of time to rehearse, you know, what is captured, you know, at least we can give it 100%. And they have
Yeah.
I will be completely engaged. I won't be behind a camera worried about, you know, composition or what's happening. I'll be able to, you know, be free.
Mhm.
But editing this film was so important. I'm never going to hand off anything that I make anymore to. Well, not that I ever have. I've edited all of my short films,
Yeah.
but but after editing this film,
Yeah.
uh, I'm going to be, you know, handling the editing. But you asked me what my favorite part was of
Mhm.
filmmaking, and for this production
Yeah.
specifically,
Yeah.
it was directing. It was directing the actors. It was actually working with my cinematographer,
Yeah.
Daniel Frank, who was amazing. Who was this was just his second film, and he was
Okay.
just so creative and intuitive. But working on set and actually directing, that was my favorite part, and I've enjoyed the whole process, you know? I love
Yeah.
writing. I'm writing my next film right now, and I love that because you don't have to
Yeah.
defer to anybody. It's just whatever's in
That's
your
true.
head, you
That's
know?
true.
It's
Yeah.
like you're the master. It's like with editing. It's like
Yeah.
everything's finished. I'm I'm the guide. I am
Yep.
making these decisions. I don't have to talk to anybody else. But
Yep.
I really loved the directing process in this film. I loved working with the actors
Yeah.
who gave 100%, and I loved working, you know, with the crew. Everyone was just on and happy to be there and
Yeah.
engaged, you know? So I
Yeah.
loved that. So that
Yeah.
was my favorite part of 13 Tracks, just being on set and working with
Yeah.
everybody and making a scary movie, you know? It's like we were excited to, you know, hopefully make something scary or weird, you know? We were there and
Yeah.
invested in every scene. It's like, how do we want, you know, the audience to feel, you know?
Yeah.
And I love those conversations and the back and forth with the actors. So I would have to
Yeah.
say the actual production was my favorite part. Um,
Yeah. And
and
so this was your first time directing?
I've made several short films.
Okay.
Um,
But this
I,
is the
I
first,
have a
yeah, the
B.
first one.
This is my first feature.
Yeah.
I have a BFA in film and video from
Oh,
the
okay.
University of Oklahoma. And I
Oh,
actually
okay.
came to Dallas to work in production. But
Oh, okay,
unfortunately,
right.
when I came
Okay.
to Dallas about a year after I came here,
Mhm.
we lost all of our tax incentives for production, and
Oh,
everything went to Louisiana. They started shooting movies in Louisiana. All the TV
yeah.
and all the films that were shot here, a lot of that dried up. So I ended up
Oh,
focusing more on writing, marketing,
I
and
gotcha.
advertising
Oh,
writing.
okay.
So,
Hmm.
but because of that, I started a small production company on my own, and I've been making short films for the last 20 years or so. So I knew that I could make this movie on my own. I knew I
Right.
could do it on my own. I didn't know what it would
Yeah.
look like.
Sure.
I didn't know if
Yeah.
anybody would want to watch it, but I had confidence that I could make it, even if another company didn't buy it. I didn't write it thinking, oh, there's this cool company in Dallas who might buy the script. I didn't. That wasn't why I did it. I wrote it because
I
I
understand,
knew I
yeah.
could direct it, and I would. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's how that played out.
And so are your shorts, are they on Vimeo too, or are there somewhere else you can find them?
They're on YouTube. I think a lot
They're
of
on
them
YouTube.
are on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I will,
they're
I'm
not
gonna
they're
link.
not you what?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to I wasn't sure if you were frozen or I jumped in.
No, I was waiting. No,
I
you're
was just
good.
gonna say they're not as technically efficient as 13 tracks is. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
Sure.
for the last 20 years, so there's some genre titles on available on YouTube. I did a comedy with some friends as well. So yeah, some of my work
Oh,
is
okay.
online.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'll link everything, including your socials or like anything like that that I can link. I'll put in the
Okay.
description for this
Okay.
episode so people
Cool.
can find it too. Um, yeah, and I think you technically already answered this, but I try to make a point to remember to ask anybody that I interview that comes on what their favorite scary movie is. I think you
Oh,
kind of
well, I
already
love
told me.
that question. Well, I have a lot of favorite scary movies, but
Okay, well then you just tell yeah, just tell me whichever
no,
ones you want to hear then.
no, my very favorite scary movie is Halloween from 1978.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, that's not anything, earth-shattering, I mean, a lot of people love that movie. I
Yeah.
saw it, originally in, a grindhouse in 1979. I saw it on a double feature with Night of the Living Dead,
Oh,
with an audience.
cool.
The audience was completely engaged in both of these movies. Night of the
That's
Living
so
Dead was
cool.
first, and then
Uh-huh.
Halloween, and, nobody was on a phone. People
That's
were, like,
such a cool
shouting at the screen.
memory.
It was such a great memory, and,
Ah,
seared into
jealous.
my brain, and it was like a urban grindhouse in Oklahoma City,
Yeah.
an old majestic movie theater that had, fallen into disrepair, and they were showing, exploitation titles, and my father
Oh, yeah.
wanted to take my brother and I to see Night of the Living Dead. That was like a touchstone with him and my mom, and they were like, I need to show you this movie." However, Halloween was a movie that my mom did not want us to see because she'd heard about,
Oh,
things in it,
I can
but
see
we were
that,
able to
yeah.
stay and watch both of them. I was 9 at the time.
Oh
I
my
was 9,
god. That's a cool
and,
memory.
seared into my brain. But
I bet.
Halloween's always, held a special place in my heart, and, um, I don't have to tell you why. I mean, a lot of people like the movie Halloween, but,
That's true. Yeah.
in general, I like some of the weirder titles that came out in the early '70s, like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which I saw on television,
Oh,
haunted
okay.
me for years, and
Yeah.
Messiah of Evil, which I did see, on a drive-in screen, under one of its many alternate titles. I think it was what was it called? It wasn't Dead People, it was Night of the Damned. I saw Messiah of
Oh,
Evil. Going back to 13 tracks, there were lots of, visual, that Halloween's always in my head. The Dean Cundy, his
now that you
cinematography is
say that, I
amazing,
can totally see it.
and,
Yeah.
I mean, it was not a conversation ever with, my lead act bridey, Marie Corbett, who
Mhm.
plays Agatha. It was never really a
Mhm.
conversation with her about, okay, this is the Jamie Lee Curtis scene. This is what we're doing
Right.
here. This is something that was seen before.
Yeah.
But I did
Yeah.
have her watch a lot of films. We didn't discuss Laurie Strode or other movies
Yeah.
much. We discussed Let's Scare Jessica to Death and Messiah of
Yeah.
Evil because those were the direct
The two big, yeah.
comparisons, I guess. But there are allusions to Halloween, and I think that not maybe intentional at first, but
I can see it now that you say that. Yeah.
with Bridie and the camera following Bridie that I'd like to think hold up in some way,
Mhm.
and though it wasn't intentional, I've of course watched the movie several times now after I finished it,
Right.
and it's like, oh well, that's kind of like that, or this moment
Yeah.
seems a little bit, it's lit a little bit like Dean Cundy would light the room in Halloween.
Yeah.
So there are some moments that I think reflect
Yeah.
that film as well.
Yeah, and now that you say that, I'm thinking of things in my head, like, that happened that are very, Halloween-esque that I didn't necessarily think about the first time. Huh. Yeah.
But when you love movies so much, when you're a geek, it's like all that
Yeah.
stuff is in the back of your head, and sometimes
Always.
it's not intentional at first, but
Yeah.
unconsciously, yes. And that freeze frame, that frame that you have on our interview of Townsend Williams,
Yeah.
the young actress who's in the movie, that
Yeah.
moment that scene was a scene that we rewrote. We had to rewrite it
Oh.
just days before we shot it. But
Oh.
going through what we had to work with, we decided at the last minute, I did, that I wanted to do a little Brood homage. So there's a moment right here where the young actress has red paint on her hands
Our hands.
and she
Yeah.
touches the posts. And there's a moment in Cronenberg's The Brood, I don't know if you've seen that or not,
I have.
where
Yep.
one of the Brood grabs a
Uh-huh.
hold of
Does the
the stair,
Yep.
whatever, and leaves handprints. So
Marks,
that
yeah.
was an intentional homage, that one. But
That one was intentional. Yeah.
other than
That was
that, there aren't a lot
that
of
was
visual
a
nods.
yeah. That was one of my favorite sequences, actually. I have a few, but that was one that I really liked because I wasn't I liked that I thought I knew what was going to happen and then I kind of didn't. Like when the paper, like without giving too much away, when the paper comes down and you see what's on the paper, I was like, "Oh, like that's not what I was expecting." But in a good way. Like it was one of those things where it like hit different because I wasn't able to foresee that coming. It just, I don't know, like I really liked it. And the actress did the little one did such a great job.
Townsend was so good, and
Yeah.
she was like a last minute casting decision, and I'm
Oh,
so
okay.
thankful that she's in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, she did a great job.
Yeah. And then I think the other moment I was going to mention, and I won't say too much about it, but it's like kind of towards the beginning a little bit, once you start really being able to hear the what she's listening to connecting with like real world situations, like and she's going down that alley and she gets to the trash can. I was like, oh no. It was like the
That's
first
cool.
real like intense second where you're just like, oh, these are starting to like really connect. Like it was just one of those things where you're kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird.
Okay.
And then you're like, you see the silver trash can and what's being said. And I won't say what it is. I don't want
Okay.
to spoil it. But it's one of those things where I was just like, oh my God. Like I loved that. That really
Cool.
changed my thinking around like what was happening. And I really liked it a lot.
Oh, cool. Well, it's great to hear somebody, enjoyed it. I mean, I've been living in a vacuum, and I, go back and forth on it. It's sort of like, oh, well, those
Yeah.
scenes are good, and I'm glad I did that. But here's this other thing. So it's not. It's just nice to hear, anyone talking about it in a positive way. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you enjoyed that.
I did.
And
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know that I'm looking forward to the conversation of the film after people start watching it, but that's social media can get a little weird. But I'm ready. I'm ready, and I won't lie to you. I will read everything that's out there. I will read every review that's posted. So,
Yeah, and I think well, and you said that
so
you thought earlier, you don't expect it to be like everybody's thing, but I think that's true with the genre in general because I think it's like everybody goes into films with something that they're looking for specifically, and it's just impossible to know what every single
oh,
person is going to want. But
absolutely.
I think music people, I think people who are fans of classic horror, especially pre-80s stuff, I think a lot of horror fans are going to walk away really enjoying this experience, and I mean that truly.
Oh, good. Oh, well, good. I hope so.
Fingers
We spent a
crossed.
lot of well, we spent a lot of time on it, and I know that there are
Yeah,
components of it that are interesting, and I think
I
that
agree.
horror fans will find something engaging, hopefully, with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really appreciate you giving it your time, and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Thanks for making time for the interview and for sending me the screener. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. This was a great conversation too. I love listening to
oh
passionate people
yeah,
talk about their films.
oh me too, me too. I much prefer one-on-one than sort of a group sort of chat.
Oh,
You
sure.
know,
Sure.
no, and you have
Yeah.
a very
So
interesting point of view. So
yeah, that's true. Well, and so this comes out the 16th, December 16th.
the 13th,
13th. I'm sorry, the 13th. That's
December
right. So
13th, right?
this episode will literally come out 10th, 11th, 12th, the day of the release.
Nice. Perfect.
So if you're watching this, go watch 13 Tracks to Scare Agatha Black. It is on, you can get it on Blu-ray and it's on video on demand. You can watch it and rent it now. So do that because we didn't
Right.
spoil anything and there's plenty to absorb when you watch it as a first watch. So and probably I feel like even more than that. Like I'll probably watch it again and I'll feel the same. Like I'll be seeing
Well,
things, noticing, feeling things I didn't the first time. So yeah, definitely go check that out. Because it's out today. As we're like, once this goes
it
up,
is.
it'll
It's
be
out
out.
today. You can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and you can
Barnes and
buy it.
Noble.
So it's on Barnes and Noble on their website. I don't know if you can go
Yeah,
to a
yeah,
physical store, but yeah. So yeah,
definitely do it.
go
Cool.
out
Well,
today.
thank you again so much. This was a
Thank
lot of
you,
fun.
Angel.
Yeah,
It really was fun. Thank you so
of
much.
course.
Have me on again. We'll just talk about
I
horror movies.
definitely will. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, especially once you get done writing your next movie.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Well, that's all we have for this episode. Thank you so much. I'm going to put Bradley's information and as well as where you can find 13 Tracks in the description for this episode. If you love horror, if you've been a fan of the genre for a really long time, even if you're new to horror, I highly recommend checking this film out. And like I said, I'll put all the links below. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Have a good rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one.